You're becoming too much to handle, Mom. Have you thought about assisted living? The words hung in the air of my kitchen like a fog that wouldn't lift. I gripped the edge of the counter, steadying myself against the sudden weight of my daughter's suggestion. Becky hadn't even looked up from her phone as she said it, scrolling through what I assumed were more retirement community brochures she'd been thoughtfully collecting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was my 70th birthday. The cake she'd brought, store-bought, not homemade like I'd always done for her, sat half-eaten on the dining table where our family had gathered for generations. Where I'd taught her to read, where I'd helped her with college applications, where I'd comforted her through her first heartbreak. And now, apparently, where I was being told I had become a burden. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself and this house, I said, my voice steadier. Then I felt. The doctor said I'm in excellent health for my age. Mom, you fell last month getting the Christmas decorations down from the attic. One fall in 10 years hardly makes me incompetent, I countered, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. Becky sighed that patronizing sigh I'd come to dread. The one that made me feel like our roles had completely reversed, and not in a good way. Look, Tom and I have been talking, she continued, finally setting down her phone. This house is too big for just you. The maintenance alone is going to become overwhelming, and we worry about you being so isolated out here. I almost laughed at that. Isolated? I lived 3 blocks from the community center where I volunteered 4 days a week. My book club met every Wednesday at the local library. I had more active friendships than Becky did, with her endless work hours and obsession with climbing the corporate ladder. Plus, she added with what I recognized as her closing argument voice, she hadn't gotten that from me, that was all her father. We've already started thinking about Ethan's college fund. This house would be a significant part of his future when it eventually, became hers. The unspoken truth hung between us. My home of 45 years, the one I'd maintained through my husband's death 12 years ago, through economic downturns and my own retirement. From teaching, this was already factored into her financial planning. I watched Becky gather her purse, kiss me dutifully on the cheek, and promise to send those links to retirement communities. After she left, I wandered through the rooms of my house, trailing my fingers along the familiar walls, the doorframe, where I'd marked Becky's height every year until she'd turned 18. The built-in bookshelves my Frank had installed the summer before his heart attack, filled with books I'd collected throughout my life. This wasn't just real estate to be liquidated for Ethan's education. This was the physical manifestation of my life story. And apparently, I was expected to surrender it, to fade quietly into a sterile apartment with beige walls and scheduled activities, while Becky and Tom benefited from the property values in my increasingly desirable neighborhood. That night, sleep eluded me. I kept seeing Becky's face, not as the successful pharmaceutical sales manager she'd become, but as the little girl who'd once promised she'd take care of me when I got old, after I'd nursed her through chickenpox and coached her through fractions. By morning, something had shifted inside me. A spark of indignation had kindled, growing stronger as I sipped my morning coffee at the breakfast nook overlooking the garden I'd tended for decades. I opened my laptop. Yes, contrary to Becky's frequent assumptions, I was perfectly capable of using technology and began researching, not retirement homes, but local small business opportunities. For years, I'd harbored a dream that I'd always deemed impractical or selfish. I'd been a high school English teacher my entire career, but I'd always wanted to open a small bookshop cafe, a place where people could gather, where books and ideas could be shared over properly brewed tea and homemade pastries. I'd pushed the dream aside to focus on raising Becky after Frank died, then convinced myself I was too old to start something new. But 70 wasn't ancient. Not anymore. Not in a world where people routinely lived well into their 90s. I potentially had decades left. Decades I refused to spend being managed by my daughter, as though I were already senile. The next afternoon, I called my oldest friend Helen and invited her for coffee. Helen had retired from accounting 5 years before and now consulted for small businesses. She'd know if my idea was completely ludicrous or potentially viable. "A bookshop cafe?" Helen repeated, her eyes lighting up as I explained my thoughts. "Maggie, that's not crazy at all. With your knowledge of literature and the lack of independent bookstores in Oak Ridge since Milligan's closed last year, there's definitely a market." "But I'm 70, I said, voicing my biggest concern. "Who starts a business at 70? Helen snorted. "My brother-in-law started his carpentry business at 68. He's 76 now and turning away clients because he's too busy. Age is only a limitation if you allow it to be." Her confidence was contagious. By the time she left, we'd made plans to visit some available commercial properties the following week, and I'd promised to start drafting a business plan. When I mentioned these plans during Sunday dinner at Becky and Tom's house the following weekend, the reaction was exactly what I'd anticipated. "A bookstore?" Tom's laugh was immediate and dismissive. "In this economy, with Amazon dominating the market, that's financial suicide." "It's not just a bookstore," I corrected, maintaining my composure. "It's a community space with books, quality coffee and tea, and events. Book clubs, author talks, poetry readings." "Mom," Becky said, using that patient voice that made me feel like I was about 5 years old. "Do you have any idea what commercial rent costs these days? Or the first thing about inventory management, supply chains, point-of-sale systems?" "Actually, I've been researching all of that," I replied, pulling out the tablet where I'd been organizing my notes. "Helen's been helping me with the financial projections and—" "Helen?" Becky interrupted. "Your friend who does taxes for church members out of her dining room? That's who you're taking business advice from?" "Helen worked as a CPA for 30 years before she retired," I reminded her. "She's helped dozens of small businesses get started." Tom and Becky exchanged a look I knew all too well, the mom's being ridiculous look they'd perfected over the years. "Look," Tom said, setting down his fork with an air of finality. "Even if, and that's a huge if, you could get the financing for something like this, which no bank would reasonably provide to someone your age for a new venture, you'd be depleting assets that are meant to be your safety net. Or, frankly, Ethan's inheritance." There it was again, the assumption that my resources existed primarily for my grandson's future, not for my present. I looked across the table at Ethan, 12 years old, and completely absorbed in his phone, oblivious to the conversation about the wealth his parents were already counting on. "I'm not asking for permission," I said quietly. "I'm sharing my plans, out of courtesy." "Plans?" Becky's voice rose slightly. "Mom, this isn't a plan. It's a fantasy, like when Dad used to talk about buying that sailboat." The comparison stung. Frank had dreamed of sailing in retirement, had spent years researching boats and plotting courses along the coast. But we'd always deferred, putting Becky's needs first, her college tuition, her wedding. By the time we could have afforded it, his health was failing. He died never having realized that particular dream. "Your father should have bought that boat," I said, surprising even myself with the firmness in my voice. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And I should have encouraged him more. We both put our dreams on hold, always thinking there would be more time. I don't intend to make that mistake again. The conversation deteriorated from there, with Becky eventually suggesting that perhaps I should speak to my doctor about depression or cognitive issues. By the time I drove home, my hands were shaking with a combination of anger and determination. 3 days later, I met with Jim Peterson at First Heritage Bank. I'd known Jim casually for years. He'd been Frank's golf buddy before Frank's health declined. Now, in his early 60s, Jim had always treated me with respect, unlike many of the younger financial advisors I'd encountered who seemed to think women my age were invisible or incompetent. "Maggie?" he greeted me warmly. "It's been too long. How's that beautiful garden of yours?" We chatted briefly about perennials and the unseasonably warm weather before getting down to business. I laid out my idea, showing him the preliminary business plan Helen and I had developed, the market research we'd done, and the commercial property on Elm Street I was considering. Jim listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about my intended customer base, operational plans, and financial projections. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, regarding me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "No," he said finally. "Most people your age come in here looking to simplify, to ensure their assets will sustain them through retirement. You're looking to build something new. I find that refreshing." "Then you don't think I'm being foolish?" I asked, bracing for the gentle letdown. "Foolish? No. Ambitious, certainly. There will be challenges." Jim pulled up some figures on his computer. "But you've done your homework. The property on Elm is well priced for the location, and your home equity is substantial enough to finance this venture without over-leveraging yourself." My heart quickened. "So you think it could work?" "I think," Jim said carefully, "that you have the financial capacity and, from what I can see, the determination. The business plan needs refining, but the concept is sound, especially the community aspect. Oak Ridge has been lacking a central gathering place since Milligan's closed." We spent the next hour discussing options: a home equity line of credit, potentially selling my house and purchasing a smaller residence along with the commercial property, or various combinations of these approaches. By the time we finished, I had a clear path forward. "I should mention," Jim said as I gathered my papers, "that I ran into Becky at the Rotary Club lunch last week. She mentioned she's been looking into retirement communities for you." I stiffened. "Did she?" Jim's expression was carefully neutral. "She seemed to think it was a settled matter, that you were on board with the idea." "It's not, and I'm not," I said firmly. "Becky seems to think I've reached the point where my primary responsibility is to preserve her inheritance rather than live my own life." Something like understanding flickered in Jim's eyes. He'd raised 3 children of his own. Perhaps he recognized the dynamics at play. "Well," he said, standing to walk me out, "based on our conversation today, I'd say you have plenty of life left to live on your terms, Maggie. Let me know when you're ready to proceed and we'll make it happen." As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in months. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I harbored no illusions about that. But for the first time since Frank's death, I had a clear sense of purpose, a direction that was entirely my own. That evening, I sat in my garden as the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. The spring bulbs were just beginning to push through the soil, daffodils I'd planted decades ago, still returning faithfully each year. I thought about Becky's words, becoming too much to handle. The house is too big for just you. Perhaps she was right about one thing. This house, with its 4 bedrooms and sprawling yard, was more than I needed now. But downsizing didn't have to mean surrendering my independence or deferring my remaining years to my daughter's financial planning. My phone buzzed with a text from Becky. "Sent you some links to Sunset Meadows. Very nice community, good activities program. Let's tour." "Next week?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and revisited the listing for the Elm Street property. The building was a charming Victorian that had previously housed a law office. The main floor would be perfect for the bookshop cafe, with high ceilings, large windows, and beautiful hardwood floors. The second floor had been converted into a spacious 2-bedroom apartment, more than adequate for my needs. I could sell this house, purchase the Elm Street property, and still have enough capital to launch the business with a comfortable safety margin. I wouldn't be dependent on Becky, wouldn't be tucked away in some facility waiting to die while she planned how to spend my assets. With sudden clarity, I knew what I needed to do. I picked up my phone and typed a response to Becky. "No need for tours. I've made other arrangements. We'll explain soon." Then I called Helen. "I'm ready," I told her when she answered. "Let's make an offer on the Elm Street building." "Are you sure?" Helen asked, though I could hear the excitement in her voice. "This is a big step, Maggie." "I'm sure," I said, watching the last rays of sunlight illuminate my garden. It's time for a new chapter. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. With Helen's help, I secured a pre-approval letter from Jim, made an offer on the Elm Street property, and began preparing my house for the market. Years of teaching English had given me an eye for organization and detail that translated well to this new venture. I hired a realtor recommended by Helen, a no-nonsense woman named Carol who specialized in homes in established neighborhoods like mine. She walked through the house, making notes and asking questions about updates and renovations. "The market is strong right now," she told me. "Houses in this neighborhood rarely come available, and yours has been beautifully maintained. We should price it aggressively." The figure she suggested made my breath catch, nearly triple what Frank and I had paid for it in 1978. I knew property values had increased, of course, but seeing the actual number written down was startling. "Is that realistic?" I asked skeptically. Carol nodded confidently. "The local school ratings have improved significantly in the last 5 years. Young families are desperate to get into this district, and your garden, Maggie, landscape designers, couldn't create that kind of established beauty. We'll emphasize the mature plantings in our marketing." It was surreal to hear my home, my life, discussed in terms of market value and selling points. But it was also oddly liberating. This house had served its purpose, sheltering my family, providing stability, creating memories. Now it could fuel my next adventure. I was sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep and what to donate, when Becky arrived unannounced. She'd been calling repeatedly since my cryptic text, but I'd limited our conversations to brief exchanges, telling her I was busy with a project. She stood in the doorway of the guest room, staring at the labeled boxes and organized piles. "Mom, what is all this? Are you finally considering downsizing?" "In a manner of speaking," I replied, continuing to sort through a box of Frank's old sweaters I'd never been able to part with. I selected 2 that held special memories and set the rest aside for donation. "Well, that's a relief," Becky said, visibly relaxing. "I was starting to worry after your text. So you'll come tour Sunset Meadows with me?" "No," I said simply. "I'm not moving to Sunset Meadows or any other retirement community. I'm buying a building on Elm Street, a commercial property with an apartment above it. I'm opening my bookshop cafe." Becky's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and then something like panic. "You're what?" she finally managed. "Mom, we discussed this. It's a terrible idea. Financially irresponsible. At your age—" "At my age," I interrupted firmly. "I have the experience, knowledge, and time to pursue something I've always wanted to do. And according to both Helen and Jim Peterson at the bank, I have the financial means to do it responsibly." "Jim Peterson? You went to the bank without consulting me?" "I wasn't aware I needed your consultation for my financial decisions, Rebecca." The use of her full name wasn't lost on her. It had always been our signal that a line had been crossed. "Of course you don't need my permission," she backpedaled, "but this affects the whole family. We've been counting on, we've been planning with the assumption that this house would eventually be yours and then Ethan's," I finished for her. "Yes, I gathered that from our conversation on my birthday." Becky, at least, had the grace to look slightly ashamed. It's not just about inheritance, Mom. It's about security. Your security. This business idea is a massive risk. What if it fails? Where will you be then? If it fails, I'll still have my pension, my savings, and a lovely apartment in a great location. I'm not betting everything, Becky. I've been careful with money my entire life. Your father and I both were. That's how we afforded this house. And your education without taking on debt. But the market is volatile right now, she persisted. What if housing prices drop before you sell? What if you can't find a buyer? Just then, my phone pinged with a text. It was Carol. Offer came in full asking price, minimal contingencies. Call me. I showed the screen to Becky, whose eyes widened. You already listed the house? Her voice rose in disbelief. Without telling any of us? I listed it yesterday, I confirmed. Apparently, there was significant interest. This is happening? Too fast, Becky protested. You need to slow down, think this through more carefully. Talk to Tom. He knows about real estate investments. Tom, I reminded her gently, laughed at my business idea and essentially told me I was too old to try something new. I'm not particularly interested in his advice at the moment. Becky's face flushed with anger or frustration, perhaps both. You're being impulsive and stubborn. This isn't like you, Mom. But that was where she was wrong. This was exactly like me. Or at least, like the me I'd been before decades of compromising, of putting others' needs and expectations first, of gradually allowing myself to be defined by my roles rather than my desires. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said, not unkindly. But my decision is made. The offer on the Elm Street property has been accepted, contingent on the sale of this house. And now it seems that contingency will be satisfied. So that's it? You're just going to upend everything? Throw away security and stability for some midlife crisis bookstore? I'm well past midlife, dear, I pointed out with a small smile. If I were having a crisis, it would be more accurately called a late life awakening. And yes, I'm choosing to create something new rather than simply waiting to die in a place of your choosing. Becky flinched at my bluntness. That's not fair. I was thinking of your well-being. Were you? I asked softly. Or were you thinking of what would be most convenient for you? Most advantageous for your financial planning? She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. I should get back to sorting, I said, turning back to the box of Frank's belongings. Carol will be calling any minute to discuss the offer. Fine, Becky said stiffly. Do what you want. But don't come crying to me when this all falls apart. After she left, I sat heavily on the edge of the guest bed, surrounded by the physical remnants of my life. I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for the relationship with my daughter that seemed suddenly strained. Anxiety about the massive changes ahead. But predominantly, a powerful sense of rightness. I picked up one of Frank's sweaters, a cable-knit navy one he'd worn on countless Sunday mornings while reading the paper. I could almost hear what he would say if he were here. That's my Maggie. Never let anyone tell you what you're capable of, not even our daughter. When Carol called, I accepted the offer on my house without hesitation. As I hung up, I realized I wasn't just selling a property, I was reclaiming my right to determine my own future, to rewrite the story of my remaining years on my own terms. The burden my daughter thought I had become was about to become something quite different. A woman she would have to recognize as still very much alive, still evolving, and no longer content to be a footnote in someone else's financial planning. The renovations on the Elm Street building took longer than expected. The charming Victorian facade had hidden serious plumbing issues, and the electrical wiring needed a complete overhaul to support modern business needs. Each time my contractor, Miguel, called with another problem, I could almost hear Becky's voice in my head. See, Mom, this is exactly what I warned you about. But I refused to let setbacks derail me. I visited the site daily, watching as the main floor was transformed from a staid law office into a warm, inviting space with custom bookshelves, a small coffee bar, and comfortable seating areas. The hardwood floors, once hidden under dingy carpet, were sanded and refinished to a golden glow. The tin ceiling, a hidden treasure discovered during demolition, was restored to its original glory. "You have good vision, Ms. Wilson," Miguel commented one afternoon as we reviewed the paint samples for the exterior trim. "Most people wouldn't have seen the potential here." "I've had a lot of practice seeing potential," I replied, thinking of the countless students I'd taught over decades in the classroom. Sometimes the most promising possibilities are hidden beneath layers of neglect. Meanwhile, I was settling into the apartment upstairs. It was smaller than my house, certainly, but the space felt right. Cozy rather than cramped, simplified rather than diminished. The morning light through the east-facing windows illuminated my breakfast table perfectly. My most treasured books lined the built-in shelves in the living room. Frank's reading chair fit perfectly in the corner. Becky had been coldly furious when the sale of our family home closed, barely speaking to me for weeks. Tom, surprisingly, had been the one to broker a fragile peace, suggesting that perhaps they should reserve judgment until they saw what I was creating. "It's still a terrible financial decision," he'd said during an awkward phone call. "But it's your money to invest in as you see fit." The pause before invest had been telling, but I appreciated the olive branch nonetheless. 6 weeks after I moved in, Helen helped me interview potential staff for the bookshop cafe. We needed someone with both barista skills and literary knowledge, not an easy combination to find in Oak Ridge. "What about this one?" Helen slid a resume across my kitchen table. "Olivia Martinez, English major at State University, graduating next month. Worked at the campus coffee shop all 4 years. Seems perfect." I reviewed the young woman's qualifications. She is overqualified, if anything. Why would she want to work at a startup bookshop in Oak Ridge when she could pursue publishing jobs in the city? "Let's ask her," Helen suggested pragmatically. "Maybe she has reasons to stay local." Olivia arrived for her interview promptly the next day, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a professional blazer over a simple dress. She looked both younger and older than her 22 years. Younger in her earnest enthusiasm, older in her thoughtful, measured responses to my questions. "Why a bookshop in Oak Ridge?" I finally asked. "With your qualifications, you could pursue opportunities in larger markets." "My grandmother lives here," Olivia explained. "She raised me after my parents died when I was 8. She's getting older now, and I want to be nearby. Plus," she added with an unexpected smile, "I've always believed that small towns deserve good literature and excellent coffee as much as big cities do." I felt an immediate kinship with this young woman who understood both family obligations and the transformative power of books. By the end of our conversation, I knew I'd found not just an employee, but a kindred spirit. "When do you graduate?" I asked as we concluded the interview. "May 15th, she replied. "I could start the following Monday, if that works for your timeline." "Perfect. The shop opens June 1st. That gives us 2 weeks to train and prepare." As Olivia stood to leave, she hesitated. "Mrs. Wilson, can I ask what made you decide to open a bookshop at this point in your life?" The question was bold, but not impertinent. I considered my answer carefully. "Let's just say I realized that the final chapters of my story shouldn't be written by someone else," I told her. "And please call me Maggie." The weeks leading up to the grand opening of Maggie's Corner were a blur of activity. Book deliveries, equipment installation, staff training, marketing efforts. Each day brought new challenges and triumphs. Olivia proved to be invaluable, her youth and energy complementing my experience and steadiness. She suggested creating a social media presence for the shop, something I hadn't considered. and designed elegant promotional materials that captured exactly the atmosphere I hoped to create. Helen, true to her accounting background, helped me set up proper bookkeeping, systems and inventory tracking. Jim from the bank stopped by regularly, ostensibly to check on his investment, but clearly also to offer encouragement and occasionally to sample the pastries we were taste testing from local bakeries. 3 days before the grand opening, Becky finally came to see the shop. She arrived unannounced, dressed in her work clothes, a tailored suit that projected corporate competence, and stood in the doorway surveying the space with an expression I couldn't quite read. "So this is it," she said, stepping inside and running her finger along one of the bookshelves. "It's cozy." Coming from Becky, whose aesthetic ran toward sleek minimalism, cozy wasn't necessarily a compliment, but I chose to take it as one. "Would you like a tour?" I offered. Olivia just finished arranging the fiction section. "Olivia? My assistant manager. She's brilliant. Just graduated with honors in English literature." Becky raised an eyebrow. "Assistant manager? How many staff are you planning to have?" Just 3 for now. Olivia, myself, and a part-time barista for the morning rush. We'll adjust as needed once we see the traffic patterns." I showed her around the shop, pointing out the carefully curated sections: classics, contemporary fiction, children's books, local history, and poetry. The coffee bar with its gleaming espresso machine and display case waiting to be filled, with pastries. The comfortable armchairs arranged near the fireplace, which would be lovely in winter. "The shelving is modular," I explained, "so we can rearrange for author events or book club meetings, and the tables are on casters so they can be moved aside for community gatherings." Becky nodded, her expression still guarded. "And the apartment? Upstairs? Is it adequate?" I recognized the concern beneath the stiff phrasing. Despite everything, she worried about my comfort. "It's perfect for me," I assured her. "Would you like to see it?" She followed me up the narrow staircase to my new home. I watched her take in the sunlit rooms, the carefully arranged furniture, the small balcony overlooking Elm Street. The space was undeniably smaller than our family home, but it was warm, functional, and mine in a way that felt deeply satisfying. "I kept the things that matter most," I told her, gesturing to Frank's books on the shelves, his favorite chair, by the window, the quilt my mother had made displayed on the wall. The rest was just stuff. "Dad's sailboat picture," she noted, spotting the framed photograph of the vessel he'd dreamed of but never owned. I wondered what happened to that. "It reminds me to pursue the things that matter while there's still time," I said quietly. Becky fell silent, moving to the window that overlooked the street below. Finally, she turned to face me. "Mom, I still think this is risky. Opening a bookstore when the industry is struggling, taking on a commercial mortgage at your age, hiring staff you'll be responsible for. It's a lot." "I know," I acknowledged, "but it's a calculated risk. The business plan is solid, the location is good, and I've done my research. And even if it doesn't succeed as I hope, I'll have tried. That matters to me." "And the money from the house? Our family home?" There was an unmistakable edge to her question. "Is funding this next chapter of my life," I finished firmly. "Becky, I know you had expectations about inheritance, about how I would spend my later years. But I need you to understand something important. My resources are not primarily Ethan's college fund. They're the result of decades of careful saving by your father and me, meant to support our dreams, his, mine, and yes, to help you too. But not at the cost of my own fulfillment." She flinched slightly at the directness of my response. "I never said—" "You didn't have to say it," I interrupted gently. "It was clear in everything from your dismissal of my business idea to your insistence on retirement communities where I wouldn't be a burden. I know you believe you were thinking of my welfare, but you were planning my obsolescence, Becky. and I'm not obsolete yet. Tears welled in her eyes, surprising us both. Becky rarely cried, priding herself on her professional composure. "I was trying to be responsible," she said, her voice unusually small. "To take care of you like you always took care of me." I moved to sit beside her on the window seat, taking her hand in mine. "I know, sweetheart. But the best way to take care of me is to support my choices, even when they're not the ones you would make. To trust that I know what I need." She nodded, blinking back tears. "When's the grand opening?" "Saturday at 9 a.m. Mayor Thompson is cutting the ribbon." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "The mayor? How did you manage that?" "He was in my first ever English class at Oak Ridge High," I said with a small laugh. "Failed the midterm but rallied to a B+ by the final. He hasn't forgotten." "Connections," Becky murmured, sounding almost impressed. "You've been planning this thoroughly." "I've had decades of teaching experience and 12 years of widowhood to learn how to manage on my own," I reminded her. "I'm more capable than you think." When she left an hour later, there was a tentative truce between us. Not full understanding, perhaps, but a grudging respect that felt like a beginning. The morning of Maggie's Corner's grand opening dawned. Clear and warm, perfect weather for the outdoor portion of the ceremony. I'd been awake since 5, too nervous and excited to sleep, checking and rechecking every detail. The pastry delivery had arrived. The coffee beans were perfectly ground. The register was programmed. The books were impeccably arranged. "You're going to wear a path in the floor before we even open," Olivia teased, adjusting a display of local authors. "Everything is perfect, Maggie. Try to breathe." "Right. Breathing. Important," I agreed, making a conscious effort to relax my shoulders. "I just want everything to be perfect." "Yes, I know," she finished with a smile. "And it is. Look." She guided me to the front windows where we could see the gathering crowd outside. It was still 20 minutes before the official opening, but already at least 30 people were waiting. Friends from my book club, former colleagues from the high school, neighbors from my old street, and many faces I didn't recognize. Among them, to my surprise, stood Becky, Tom, and Ethan. My grandson held a small wrapped package and was bouncing slightly on his toes with impatience. "Your family came," Olivia observed. "That's wonderful." "Yes," I agreed, emotions suddenly tightening my throat. "It is." At precisely 9 a.m., Mayor Thompson arrived, right on schedule. I joined him outside for the brief ceremony, listening with surreal detachment as he praised my contribution to the community, both as a teacher and now as a business owner. "Maggie Wilson taught me that stories matter," he concluded, "that they shape how we understand ourselves and our world. Now she's creating a space where those stories can be shared for generations to come. It's my pleasure to declare Maggie's Corner officially open." The ribbon was cut, applause erupted, and suddenly, the shop was filling with people. I found myself swept into conversations, introductions, congratulations, a whirlwind of goodwill and excitement that left little time for the anxiety I'd felt earlier. Olivia managed the coffee bar with graceful efficiency, while I helped customers find books, explained our upcoming events calendar, and accepted more hugs than I could count. The cash register chimed steadily throughout the morning, a promising start. Midway through the chaos, Becky appeared at my elbow. "Mom, this is impressive," she said, gesturing to the bustling shop. "You've created something special here." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by her acknowledgement. "That means a lot." "Ethan has something for you. He's been waiting very patiently." My 12-year-old grandson approached, holding out the small package I'd seen earlier. "It's a grand opening present, Grandma," he explained seriously. "Dad helped me pick it out." I unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful brass bell, the kind shopkeepers once used to announce customers. "It's for your counter," Ethan explained. "Dad says every proper shop needs one." I looked up in surprise to see Tom standing nearby, looking slightly embarrassed. "It was his idea," he said, nodding toward Ethan. "But I might have mentioned that my grandfather had one in his hardware store when I was a kid. I always loved the sound." "It's perfect," I told them, genuinely moved. "We'll put it right by the register." Tom cleared his throat awkwardly. "Listen, Maggie, about what I said regarding your business plan. I might have been a bit hasty in my judgment. This place has character, vision. It's not what I would have done, but it suits you." Coming from my finance-minded son-in-law, this was high praise indeed. "Thank you, Tom. That's very kind." "And," he added with a small smile, "if you ever want someone to look over your quarterly projections or discuss tax strategies for small businesses, I'd be happy to help. No charge." I recognized the offer for what it was, an olive branch, a way to contribute to my venture without fully admitting he'd been wrong to dismiss it. "I'd appreciate that," I said sincerely. "Perhaps you could join Helen and me for our first quarter review in September?" By closing time at 6 p.m., I was exhausted but elated. The sales had exceeded my most optimistic projections. The guest book was filled with enthusiastic comments. The events calendar had several sign-ups for the book clubs and author talks we'd planned. As I locked the front door, turning the sign to closed, a profound sense of accomplishment washed over me. I'd done it, taken a leap of faith, challenged expectations, created something from nothing but determination, and a lifetime of dreams deferred. Upstairs in my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and sank onto the sofa, too tired even to make tea. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. "Congratulations, brave friend. You've started something wonderful. Rest well." I smiled, grateful beyond words for her steadfast support. Just as I was about to set the phone down, another message arrived, this one from Becky. "Proud of you, Mom. Ethan can't stop talking about how his grandma is the coolest business owner in Oak Ridge. Get some sleep. You've earned it." The simple message brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Not everything was resolved between us. There were still undercurrents of tension, unspoken concerns, adjustments to be made in our understanding of each other. But this was a beginning, an acknowledgement that perhaps I'd been right to insist on writing this chapter of my life myself. The first month of business brought both triumphs and challenges. Some days the shop was bustling from opening to close. Others were quieter than I'd hoped. The coffee bar consistently performed well, but book sales were more variable. I learned quickly that children's books and local interest titles were our strongest categories, while literary fiction moved more slowly. Olivia proved invaluable, not just for her barista skills and literary knowledge, but for her instinctive understanding of what younger customers were seeking. She suggested hosting a weekly study night with extended hours on Thursdays, offering student discounts on coffee and a quiet space with free Wi-Fi. The first week we tried it, 5 students came. By the 4th week, we had 20, most purchasing drinks and many browsing the books as well. "It's working," she told me excitedly one Friday morning as we reviewed the previous day's sales. "We sold 3 poetry collections to that study group from the community college. They're planning to come back next week and want to know if we can order more works by contemporary female poets." "Make a list," I told her, "and we'll place an order today." That's exactly the kind of community connection I was hoping for. Not all our ideas were successful. The Saturday morning children's story hour I'd been so excited about drew only 2 families the first time, both friends of mine who came out of loyalty rather than interest. The senior book club was well attended but purchased few books. Many. Members preferring to borrow from the library and just come for the discussion and companionship. "We need to adjust," I told Helen as we reviewed the first month's financials over coffee after closing one evening. The numbers weren't bad, but they weren't as strong as my business plan had projected. "That's normal for any new business," she reassured me. You're learning what works for your specific community. The coffee revenue is strong. That's helping balance the slower book sales. And your operating costs are exactly on budget, which is impressive. Still, we need to boost the book side of things, I mused. People are coming in, browsing, enjoying the atmosphere, but not all of them are buying. What about partnering? With the high school? Helen suggested. Your former colleagues might be open to collaboration. The idea took root immediately. The next day, I called Janet Simmons, who had taken over as head of the English department when I retired. "Maggie," she exclaimed when she realized who was calling. "I've been meaning to visit your shop. It looks charming from the outside." "You should come in," I told her, "and bring your students. Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. I was wondering if you'd be interested in a partnership." Over the next half hour, we sketched out a plan. Maggie's Corner would offer a discount to students and faculty from Oak Ridge High. In return, the school would hold some of its events at the shop, poetry readings, author discussions, even some parent-teacher meetings that would benefit from a less institutional setting. We could also display student writing, Janet suggested, warming to the idea. Give them a real audience for their work. Maybe even a small publication we could sell at the shop. By the time we hung up, we had the framework for a collaboration that excited us both. As I shared the plans with Olivia later that day, her eyes lit up. "This is perfect," she said. And I had a similar idea for connecting with the community college. Their creative writing program is small, but growing. Maybe we could host some of their readings here? "Set it up," I told her, feeling a renewed sense of optimism. Between the high school, the community college, and our regular customers, we might just make this work. That evening, as I was closing up the shop, the ID bell over the door chimed. I looked up to see a distinguished older gentleman enter, glancing around with appreciative interest. "I'm sorry, we're actually closing," I began. "Forgive the late intrusion," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't immediately place. "I've been meaning to visit since your opening, but my schedule has been unforgiving. I'm Eduardo Martinez." Olivia's grandfather, I realized aloud. She had mentioned him often, but hadn't yet brought him to the shop. He smiled, crow's feet crinkling at the corners of his eyes. "She speaks very highly of you in this place. I can see why. It has soul." The simple assessment pleased me more than the most elaborate compliment could have. "Thank you. Your granddaughter is quite remarkable. I'm fortunate to have her here." "The fortune runs both ways, I think," he observed. "She tells me you've created quite a stir in Oak Ridge. The retired English teacher who sold her home to start a new venture instead of quietly fading into a retirement community." There was no judgment in his tone, only a warm amusement and perhaps a hint of admiration. "News travels fast in small towns," I said with a small smile. "Indeed, and inspires more than you might realize." He gestured to the shop around us. "I wonder if you might consider one more partnership. I teach art history at the community college, and I've been looking for a suitable venue for a small exhibition of student work. Nothing elaborate, perhaps a rotating display on that wall there, with a small reception for each new showing." The idea was immediately appealing. The wall he indicated was currently bare. I'd been planning to hang photographs of local landmarks but hadn't gotten around to it yet. "What kind of artwork?" I asked. "Varied. Paintings, drawings, photography, all inspired by literature or literary themes. It would complement your books beautifully, I think. And bring in new customers," I added pragmatically. Eduardo laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "Exactly. Art lovers buy books and coffee, too. Then yes, Professor Martinez, I think we have a deal. Eduardo, please. And perhaps to seal our arrangement, you might join me for dinner this Saturday? There's a new Italian place on Main Street I've been wanting to try." The invitation caught me off guard. It had been so long since I'd been asked to dinner by anyone other than family, or my circle of longtime friends, that it took me a moment to recognize it for what it was. Not just a business discussion, but a date. At 70, widowed for 12 years, I'd long ago set aside thoughts of romantic companionship. Frank had been my one great love. After his death, I'd focused on other aspects of life: my teaching career, my friendships, my garden. Later, the shop had consumed all my energy and attention. Eduardo seemed to sense my hesitation. "Just dinner," he said gently. "Between two, people of a certain age who might enjoy each other's company. No pressure, no expectations." Put that way, it seemed both less daunting and more appealing. "I'd like that," I found myself saying. "Saturday at 7? After he left, I finished closing the shop with a curious lightness in my step. The day had brought unexpected possibilities, professional partnerships that might strengthen the business, and perhaps a personal connection I hadn't been looking for, but found myself welcoming. Upstairs in my apartment, I opened my laptop to check the shop's email before bed. Among the usual messages, book order confirmations, an inquiry about hosting. A book club, the weekly newsletter from our primary distributor, was an unexpected name: Rebecca. Carterra Farm Corp. Com. Becky rarely emailed me, preferring text for brief communications and phone calls for anything substantial. Curious, I opened the message. "Mom," it began, "Tom and I have been talking. We think Ethan would benefit from spending more time with you, seeing firsthand what it means to build something meaningful, to take a risk on a dream. Would you consider having him help at the shop on Saturday mornings? Just a few hours. We'd pay him an allowance, of course." I read the message twice, understanding the shift it represented. This wasn't just about Ethan spending time with his grandmother. It was Becky acknowledging that what I was doing had value, educational value even, for her son. It was recognition that perhaps I wasn't being reckless after all, but demonstrating principles she wanted her child to learn. "I'd love to have Ethan's help," I replied, "but I won't take payment from you. If he works at the shop, he'll earn a proper wage from me. He can start this Saturday at 9 a.m. We have a special children's event planned. His energy will be welcome." I hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Becky. This means more than you know." As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in just a few short months. From being perceived as a burden to be managed, I had transformed into a business owner, a mentor to Olivia, a community connector, and soon perhaps a teacher to my own grandson in ways I hadn't anticipated. The house on Maple Avenue had been a vessel for decades of memories, years of stability and family life. But this new life, the shop, the apartment, the web of connections I was building, was not a lesser existence as Becky had feared. It was expansive in ways I was only beginning to understand, rich with possibilities I had never imagined for my 70s. I fell asleep that night not with the wistful nostalgia that had often accompanied my evenings in recent years, but with a quiet excitement for the day ahead, inventory to manage, partnerships to develop, customers to welcome. And beyond that, dinner with an intriguing man, mornings with my grandson, collaborations with the schools and college. The house that Becky thought I should never have sold had given me not just financial capital, but something far more valuable. The freedom to reimagine my life on my own terms, to discover capacities within myself I might never have known existed had I followed the script others had written for me. In selling what my daughter had viewed as her inheritance, I had claimed my own legacy. Not a structure of wood and stone to be passed down, but a living example of courage and reinvention that might prove more valuable to Ethan than any property could have been. 6 months into owning Maggie's Corner, I was standing behind the counter reviewing our quarterly financial reports when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up to see Eleanor Blackwood glide into the shop, impeccably dressed. in a cream cashmere coat despite the autumn chill outside. At 83, Eleanor was a Oak Ridge institution, the wealthy widow of the man who had founded Blackwood Industries, the manufacturing company that had once been the town's largest employer before downsizing in the 90s. Margaret, she greeted me with the formality of her generation. Eleanor was the only person in town who still called me by my full name. What a delightful atmosphere you've created here. Thank you, Eleanor. Can I offer you some tea? We just received a new Earl Grey with lavender that's exceptional. That would be lovely. She settled into one of the armchairs near the window, removing her gloves with deliberate grace. And perhaps you might join me? I have a matter of some importance to discuss. Curious, I prepared 2 cups of tea and asked Olivia to watch the counter. Eleanor rarely made social calls without purpose, and she'd never before visited the shop, though she'd sent a lovely arrangement of flowers for our opening. Your business appears to be thriving, she observed as I set down our tea. I understand. You've become quite the gathering place for the community. We're doing well, I acknowledged. Better than projected, actually. The partnerships with the schools have been particularly successful. Yes, I've heard. The student art exhibitions, the poetry readings. She took a sip of her tea, nodding, with approval. You've created something meaningful here, Margaret. Something that serves a genuine need in Oak Ridge. That was always the goal, I said, wondering where this conversation was leading. Eleanor set down her cup with precision. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. I've been watching your progress with interest. You see, I find myself in a position of needing to make some decisions about my estate, particularly the Blackwood building downtown. I nearly choked on my tea. The Blackwood building was the most prestigious commercial property in Oak Ridge, a beautiful Art Deco structure that housed law offices, the town's best restaurant, and several upscale retail spaces. As you may know, Eleanor continued, I've owned that building since Harold's passing 30 years ago. It's been a solid investment, but at my age, property management has become something of a burden. My children have no interest in real estate. Jeffrey is in California with his technology ventures, and Diana is fully occupied with her medical practice in Boston. I understand, I said, still confused about why she was sharing this with me. Are you considering selling the property? Indeed, but not to just anyone. Her sharp blue eyes studied me with unexpected intensity. I'm considering offering it to you, Margaret. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. To me? Eleanor, I couldn't possibly. Don't be too quick to dismiss the idea, she interrupted smoothly. I've been observing your business acumen. What you've accomplished here is impressive, transforming a neglected property into a thriving enterprise that enhances our community. That's precisely the kind of ownership the Blackwood building deserves. My mind raced with objections. It's an extraordinary property, but it's far beyond my financial capacity. Even with the success of Maggie's Corner, I couldn't manage the purchase price of a building like that. Eleanor waved away my concern with a slight gesture. I'm not proposing a traditional sale. I'm thinking of something more along the lines of what they call owner financing these days. I would hold the note with terms that would make it feasible for you. The building generates substantial rental income, enough to cover the payments, with proper management. I stared at her, struggling to process what she was suggesting. But why me? There must be dozens of established commercial real estate investors who would be interested in that property. Precisely, she said with a hint of distaste. Faceless investment groups who would see it only as numbers on a spreadsheet. The Blackwood building has been part of this town's identity for generations. I'd prefer it pass to someone who understands its significance to Oak Ridge. She reached into her elegant handbag and withdrew a slim folder, placing it on the table between us. These are the current financials for the building: tenant list, rental income, operating expenses, and an outline of the terms I'm proposing. Take a week to review them with your advisors. If you're not interested, no harm done, and I'll pursue other options. I felt as though I'd stepped into some alternate reality. Eleanor, I'm genuinely honored, but this is completely unexpected. I'm still learning how to manage this small business. Taking on a property of that significance seems ambitious, she supplied with a small smile. Yes, it would be. But tell me, Margaret, weren't you also considered ambitious when you sold your family home to start this business at 70? Sometimes the most meaningful growth comes from accepting challenges that others might consider beyond our reach. As she prepared to leave, Eleanor paused, her gaze sweeping around the shop with obvious approval. Your late husband would be proud of what you've created here. Frank always said you had more capability than you gave yourself credit for. I blinked in surprise. You knew Frank? Oak Ridge is a small town, my dear. Frank served on the hospital board with Harold for many years. He spoke of you often, always with great admiration. She buttoned her coat with practiced efficiency. 1 week, Margaret. Give it serious consideration before you decide. After she left, I sat staring at the folder she'd left behind, my mind whirling with conflicting thoughts. The very idea was preposterous. I was 70, not 40. I had exactly 6 months of business ownership under my belt. Taking on the Blackwood building would be like going from teaching a high school literature class to running a university English department overnight. When Olivia returned from helping a customer, she found me still sitting there, the folder untouched. Maggie? Is everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, I said faintly. Just a very unexpected proposition. I explained Eleanor's offer, watching Olivia's expression shift from surprise to excitement. The Blackwood building? That's incredible. What an opportunity. It's overwhelming is what it is, I corrected her. I can't possibly take this on. Why not? She challenged, sliding into the chair Eleanor had vacated. You took on this place when everyone thought you were crazy. The Blackwood building is just a bigger version of the same principle. A much bigger version, I emphasized, with significantly more risk. But also more potential, she pointed out. And she's offering special terms, right? Owner financing changes the equation completely. I shook my head, still processing. I need to talk to Helen and Jim at the bank. This requires serious financial analysis, not just enthusiasm. Of course, Olivia agreed. But promise me you'll actually consider it before dismissing the idea outright. This could be something extraordinary, Maggie. That evening, I finally opened Eleanor's folder after closing the shop. The contents were meticulously organized, detailed financial statements, current lease agreements, maintenance records, and property assessments. The building was fully occupied with high-quality tenants, many on long-term leases. The rental income was substantial, and the property had been impeccably maintained. Most surprising was the proposed purchase price, significantly below market value, with terms that would make the monthly payments manageable, even with conservative income projections. Eleanor wasn't offering charity, but she was clearly prioritizing, finding the right steward for the property over maximizing her profit. I stayed up late into the night, making notes, calculating figures, trying to envision what taking on such a responsibility would mean. By morning, I was bleary-eyed, but no closer to a decision. I needed objective advice from people I trusted. Helen arrived at the shop early the next day, responding to my urgent call with the promptness of a true friend. I'd barely explained the situation before she was reaching for the folder, her accountant's mind already engaged with the numbers. Let me see those financials, she said, putting on her reading glasses. Eleanor Blackwood doesn't make frivolous offers. For the next hour, she pored over the documents while I nervously tended to the morning customers. When the rush subsided, she called me back to the small office where she'd spread the papers across my desk. Maggie, she said without preamble, This is a solid opportunity. The numbers make sense. With the terms she's offering, the rental income would cover the payments and operating expenses, with a reasonable margin for contingencies. But the responsibility, Helen, all those tenants, the maintenance of a historic building, would be managed by a professional property management company, she interrupted. That's a standard expense already factored into these operating costs. You wouldn't be personally unclogging toilets or negotiating lease renewals. Still, it's an enormous commitment at my age. Helen gave me a pointed look over her glasses. Yes, at your advanced age of 70, which might give you another good 20 years or more of active life. What exactly are you saving your energy for? Put that way, the objection did sound somewhat hollow. What about risk? I persisted. If tenants leave, if the building needs major repairs. The tenant list includes some of the most stable businesses in town, most with years remaining on their leases. The building has been meticulously maintained, all major systems updated within the past decade, and there's a substantial reserve fund for unexpected expenses. She gathered the papers into a neat stack. Honestly, Maggie, as investments go, this is about as secure as they come in commercial real estate. So you think I should do it? Helen leaned back, considering her words carefully. I think you should recognize this for what it is, a remarkable vote of confidence from one of the most respected business minds in town. Eleanor Blackwood doesn't make decisions like this lightly. She sees something in you that perhaps you're still coming to recognize in yourself. I spent the rest of the day in a state of distracted contemplation, turning the possibilities over in my mind while going through the motions of running the shop. By closing time, I'd decided to get one more perspective before making my decision. Jim Peterson at First Heritage Bank had been supportive of my bookshop venture from the beginning. If anyone would give me straight talk about the financial implications of Eleanor's offer, it would be him. Eleanor Blackwood offered you the building? He let out a low whistle when I explained the situation during our meeting the next morning. That's unusual. She's declined multiple offers from development groups over the years. So you know the property well? Of course. It's the crown jewel of commercial real estate in Oak Ridge. Rock-solid investment. He studied the proposed terms I'd shared with him. These numbers are very favorable, Maggie. Not charity, but definitely terms you wouldn't find on the open market. Is it too much risk at my stage of life? I asked directly. Jim considered this. Risk is relative. What's too risky for one person might be too conservative for another. The question is whether this aligns with your goals at this point in your life. My goals, I repeated slowly. 6 months ago, my goal was to open a bookshop and prove to myself and my daughter that I wasn't ready to be shelved in a retirement community. I never imagined becoming a commercial property owner. Yet here you are, running a successful business and being offered a significant opportunity by one of the shrewdest business minds in town. Jim's expression grew thoughtful. You know, most people reach your age and start contracting their world. Fewer responsibilities, fewer challenges. You seem to be expanding yours. That's remarkable. Or foolish, I suggested. I don't think Eleanor Blackwood would offer a significant property to someone she considered foolish. He handed back the folder. From a purely financial perspective, this is sound. The real question is whether you want to take this on, not whether you can. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed with a text from Becky. Dinner at our house tonight, 7 p.m. Need to discuss something important. Our relationship had gradually improved over the months since I'd opened Maggie's Corner. Becky had moved from outright opposition to grudging respect as the shop established itself as a viable business. Ethan's Saturday morning shifts had become a regular fixture, creating a new connection between us. Even Tom had occasionally offered useful business advice, seeming to accept that I wasn't completely financially incompetent after all. Still, something important could mean anything, and I was already mentally exhausted from wrestling with Eleanor's offer. But family was family, so I texted back my acceptance and headed home to change before dinner. Becky and Tom's house was a modern construction in Oak Ridge's newest subdivision, all clean lines and neutral colors, the polar opposite of the cozy, book-filled Victorian that had become my home. As I arrived, I noticed Tom's parents' car in the driveway, suggesting this was more than a casual family dinner. Becky greeted me with a quick hug. "Thanks for coming on short notice, Mom. Dad and Joyce just arrived too." Tom's parents, Roger and Joyce Carter, were seated in the living room. Roger was a retired investment banker, Joyce a former real estate agent, both opinionated and never shy about sharing their views on financial matters. "Maggie," Joyce greeted me with her usual efficiency. "You're looking well. Becky tells us your little shop is doing nicely." "It's exceeding projections, actually," I replied, taking a seat. "Our partnership with the schools has been particularly successful." "Charming," Joyce said in a tone that suggested the opposite, "though I still think you took an unnecessary risk at your age." Before I could respond, Becky emerged from the kitchen. "Dinner's ready. We can talk while we eat." Over Tom's perfectly grilled salmon, the reason for the gathering became clear. "We wanted to discuss Ethan's education fund," Becky announced, passing the roasted vegetables. "Now that he's entering his teenage years, we need to get serious about college planning." "He's 12, I pointed out. "There's still time." "Not as much as you might think," Tom interjected. "With college costs rising at the current rate, we need a substantial fund to ensure he has options for top universities." Roger nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. Start early, invest aggressively." "We've been contributing to his 529 plan since birth," Becky continued, "but we're looking at accelerating our strategy. Tom's been offered a position with more responsibility at the firm, more income, but also more travel." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "Congratulations, Tom." "Thank you." He looked pleased. "It's a significant step up. But with the additional travel, we're thinking about practical issues too. Like what happens if something were to happen to both of us?" Ah. Now the presence of both sets of grandparents made sense. This was about estate planning, and likely about their expectations regarding my financial contributions to Ethan's future. "We're updating our will," Becky explained, "and we wanted to discuss how all of us might coordinate our estate planning to maximize Ethan's educational opportunities." "I see," I said carefully, already sensing where this was heading. Roger cleared his throat. "Joyce and I have already established a trust for Ethan that will mature when he turns 21. We've earmarked specific investments that will transfer directly to the trust upon our passing." All eyes turned to me, expectation hanging in the air. "That's very generous," I said. "I'm sure Ethan will appreciate your foresight." "And your plans, Maggie?" Joyce prompted when I didn't continue. "Surely you've thought about how your estate will be distributed." I took a sip of water, buying time. 6 months ago, this conversation would have proceeded very differently. They would have assumed, as Becky clearly had, that my home would eventually be sold to fund Ethan's education or provide an inheritance. Now, with the house already sold and the proceeds invested in my business, the equation had changed. "My financial situation has evolved," I said carefully. "As you know, I've invested significantly in Maggie's Corner. That represents the majority of my assets now." Becky frowned slightly. "But eventually, when you're no longer able to run the business, it would be sold, presumably," I finished for her. "And yes, I've always intended for my estate to benefit you and Ethan. That hasn't changed. What I couldn't say with Eleanor's offer still unresolved in my mind, was that the potential addition of the Blackwood building would completely transform my financial picture. If I accepted her offer, most of my assets would be tied up in commercial real estate for the foreseeable future. Good. Tom said with satisfaction. That's what we assumed. Our financial advisor suggested we get clarity on these matters while everyone is still. He hesitated. Still compos mentis? I supplied with a hint of amusement. Still capable of making sound decisions? That's not what I meant. Tom backpedaled awkwardly. It's practical planning, Becky interjected. Everyone benefits from clarity. Roger nodded sagely. Financial transparency between generations is crucial. No room for misunderstandings or false expectations. I thought of the folder sitting in my bag. Eleanor's detailed financials for the Blackwood building. The opportunity that could change everything. For a brief, rebellious moment, I considered sharing it with them, watching their expressions, as they realized I was contemplating a major investment rather than the careful preservation of assets they clearly expected. But the moment passed. This wasn't the time or place for that discussion. I needed to make my decision about Eleanor's offer first, based on what was right for me, not on anyone else's expectations. I appreciate the conversation, I said instead. And I'll be happy to discuss my estate planning in more detail once I've consulted with my own advisors. The rest of dinner passed with general conversation, but I could sense Becky's mild frustration at my non-committal response. As I prepared to leave, she followed me to the door. "Mom, is everything okay? You seemed distracted tonight." "I'm fine," I assured her. "Just considering some business decisions for the shop." "Nothing serious, I hope." "No, just possibilities." I kissed her cheek. "Give Ethan a hug from me. Tell him I'll see him Saturday for his shift." As I drove home, the contrast between the evening's conversation and Eleanor's offer couldn't have been more stark. One was about the careful preservation and eventual distribution of assets. The other was about growth, risk, and new challenges. One looked toward the end of my productive life. The other suggested there might be significant chapters yet to be written. By the time I reached my apartment above the shop, I'd made my decision. I called Eleanor first thing the next morning. "Margaret," she answered on the second ring, as if she'd been expecting my call. "Have you had time to consider my proposition?" "I have," I replied. "I'd like to move forward, with a few conditions." "I expected nothing less. Shall we meet tomorrow to discuss details?" We arranged to meet at her home the following afternoon. As I hung up, a strange mix of terror and exhilaration washed over me. I was 70 years old and about to take on the largest financial commitment of my life, far beyond anything Frank and I had ever contemplated together. I spent the morning at the shop, going through the motions of everyday business while my mind raced with questions and possibilities. After lunch, I asked Olivia to manage the afternoon shift and changed into my most businesslike outfit, a navy blazer over a simple dress that projected confidence I didn't entirely feel. Eleanor's home was an elegant Georgian colonial on Oakridge's historic north side, set back from the street behind mature oaks and maples blazing with autumn color. The housekeeper who answered the door led me to a sunroom overlooking immaculately maintained gardens. Eleanor was seated at a small table arranged with tea service and a stack of documents. At 83, she remained a commanding presence, silver. Hair perfectly styled, posture straight, gaze sharp and evaluating. "Margaret," she greeted me, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. "Right on time. I value punctuality in business matters." "Thank you for seeing me," I replied, settling into the offered seat. "And for your extraordinary offer." "Which you're prepared to accept?" she prompted, direct as always. "Yes, with a few considerations I'd like to discuss." I expected nothing less. She poured tea for us both. "Let's hear them." I took a deep breath and outlined the points I'd carefully prepared. A transition period where she would remain available for consultation, retention of the current building manager, a thorough review of all vendor contracts before finalizing, the purchase, and a request to keep my ownership temporarily confidential while I established myself. Eleanor listened attentively, occasionally making notes in an elegant leather-bound notebook. When I finished, she nodded slightly. All reasonable requests. The transition period is sensible. Gerald, the building manager, has been with the property for 20 years and knows every inch of it. He's excellent, and I would have recommended keeping him regardless. She sipped her tea. As for the confidentiality, may I ask why? I hesitated, then decided honesty was best. My family, particularly my daughter, is still adjusting to my new role as a business owner. Learning that I'm taking on a significant property investment might create unnecessary tension before everything is legally settled. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly with understanding. Ah, yes. The well-meaning children who believe they know what's best for their aging parents. I'm familiar with the dynamic, though fortunately my own offspring limit their meddling to occasional suggestions about my health regimen. She set down her cup with precision. Very well. We can structure the purchase through an LLC that doesn't immediately identify you as the owner. Gerald would need to know, of course, but he's the soul of discretion. Thank you, I said, relieved that she understood without requiring elaborate explanation. Now, regarding financing, she continued briskly, I'm assuming you'd prefer terms that allow you to maintain adequate operating capital for your existing business. Yes, that's a significant concern. Maggie's Corner is doing well, but it's still in its early stages. Eleanor made a quick calculation on a notepad. I could agree to a 15% down payment instead of the standard 20%, with a modest increase in the interest rate. That would keep your monthly obligations manageable while providing you with more flexibility. The figure she quoted for the down payment was substantial but achievable with careful planning. The monthly payments, covered by rental income from existing tenants, would still allow for a reasonable profit margin. That would be ideal, I agreed, feeling a wave of relief that she was being so accommodating. Eleanor set down her pen and gave me an appraising look. Margaret, may I ask you something directly? When I nodded, she continued, Are you comfortable with the responsibility you're taking on? This is a significant step up from managing a bookshop, no matter how successful. The question didn't offend me. In fact, I appreciated her candor. It's a fair question. 6 months ago, my answer would have been no. But I've discovered something about myself since opening Maggie's Corner. I'm more capable than I was led to believe for most of my adult life. I learn quickly. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I have excellent advisors I trust. A hint of a smile played at Eleanor's lips. For what it's worth, I agree with your self-assessment. You remind me somewhat of myself at your age, determined, pragmatic, with something to prove. Did you have something to prove? I asked, surprised. My dear, every woman in business has something to prove, especially those of us who began our careers when female executives were as rare as unicorns. The difference is what we do with that motivation. She rose and walked to the window, gazing out at her garden. Do you know why the Blackwood building is important to me, Margaret? It's been in your family for generations, hasn't it? Yes, but there's more to it than mere inheritance. She turned to face me. My father built that building in 1939, just as the country was emerging from the Great Depression. Everyone told him it was foolish to invest in commercial real estate when businesses were still failing by the thousands. But he saw beyond the immediate circumstances to the potential of what Oak Ridge could become. She returned to her seat, her expression softening with memory. When Harold and I took over management after my father's death, we expanded it during the recession of the 1970s. Another decision financial advisors called reckless. Both times, conventional wisdom suggested caution, conservation, retreat. Both times, vision and courage proved more valuable than conventional wisdom. I understood then why she had chosen me, not because I was the most qualified or experienced candidate, but because she recognized a similar willingness to challenge expectations, to build something new when others counseled caution. I believe I can be a worthy steward of that legacy, I told her. I believe so too, she replied simply. Now, shall we discuss timeline? How quickly can you arrange financing? The meeting continued for another hour as we hammered out details. The formation of my new LLC, which we decided to call Horizon Properties, the transition plan, and the closing schedule. By the time I left Eleanor's home, my head was spinning with information, but my heart was surprisingly steady. The path forward was clear, if daunting. As I drove back toward town, I passed the Blackwood building, the Art Deco facade glowing in the late afternoon sunlight, the brass directory by the main entrance listing the current tenants, the discreet plaque commemorating its construction. Soon, this landmark would be my responsibility, not just a business investment, but a piece of Oak Ridge's history entrusted to my care. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what Frank would have said about this turn of events. I could almost hear his voice. That's my Maggie, always surprising everyone, especially yourself. I smiled at the thought. Frank had always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. Perhaps he would have seen this capacity in me long before I recognized it myself. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Meetings with attorneys to establish the LLC, detailed reviews of the property documents, discussions with Jim about financing arrangements. Through it all, I continued to run Maggie's Corner, finding an unexpected comfort in the daily routines of ordering books, making coffee, and greeting regular customers. I hadn't yet told anyone except Helen and Jim about the Blackwood building. Olivia sensed something was happening. She was too perceptive not to notice my distracted moments and mysterious appointments. But she respected my privacy enough not to pry. The Saturday before the scheduled closing, Ethan was working his usual morning shift at the shop, carefully restocking the young adult section while I worked on the monthly newsletter at the counter. "Grandma," he said suddenly, "are you famous? Now?" I looked up from my computer, amused. "Famous? Hardly. Why do you ask?" Mrs. Blackwood came to our school yesterday for career day. She talked about business and investing and stuff. He arranged the books with careful attention to their height, a system he'd developed himself. Afterward, she asked me if I was related to you. She said you were a woman of remarkable vision and that I should be proud. I nearly dropped my pen. Eleanor Blackwood said that? About me? Ethan nodded, oblivious to my surprise. Yeah. She seemed really impressed that I work here, said it was valuable experience. He shelved the last book and turned to face me. Mom and Dad were surprised too. Dad said he didn't realize you and Mrs. Blackwood were friends. We're acquaintances, I said carefully. She's visited the shop a few times. Cool. She's like super rich, right? She must buy a lot of books. I suppose she does, I agreed, wondering what Eleanor was playing at. She had agreed to keep our arrangement confidential until after the closing. This deliberate mention of me to my family seemed almost like a nudge. That evening, Becky called. Mom, I didn't realize you knew Eleanor Blackwood, she said, without preamble. We've become acquainted recently, I replied, purposely vague. Oak Ridge is a small town. She's one of the wealthiest women in the county, Becky continued. Tom says her family still owns half the commercial real estate downtown. I believe they've sold some properties over the years, I said, trying to keep my tone casual. But yes, the Blackwoods have been significant property owners for generations. Ethan said she specifically mentioned you at career day, called you visionary. Ethan mentioned that, I acknowledged. I was surprised myself. What exactly is your connection to her? Becky pressed. I hesitated, torn between maintaining the confidentiality Eleanor and I had agreed upon and being honest with my daughter. The closing was scheduled for Tuesday, just 3 days away. Once the paperwork was signed, there would be no turning back. "We've been discussing a business matter," I said finally. "I'd rather not go into details until it's finalized. But yes, we've developed a professional relationship." "A business matter? With Eleanor Blackwood?" Becky's tone held equal, parts disbelief and concern. "Mom, she operates on a completely different level." "I'm aware of that," I interrupted, more sharply than I'd intended. "Becky, I appreciate your concern, but I've been managing my affairs successfully for some time now. When there's something concrete to share, I will." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Fine," she said finally, "but please tell me you're being careful, getting financial advice from the right sources." "The best," I assured her. "Jim at the bank, Helen, and a commercial real estate attorney with 30 years of experience." "An attorney? Mom, what exactly are you—" "I need to go," I said, seeing Helen's number flash on my call waiting. "Book club emergency. I'll explain everything soon, I promise." As I switched calls, I realized I was actually looking forward to Becky's reaction when she learned about the Blackwood building, not out of any petty desire to prove her wrong, but because each step I took in expanding my horizons seemed to shift her perception of me, from a mother in need of management to a woman still capable of growth and achievement. Helen's call was brief, a question about the paperwork for the LLC formation, but it reminded me of how quickly events were moving. In 3 days, I would own not just a bookshop, but one of the most significant commercial properties in Oak Ridge. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity. That night, as I prepared for bed in my apartment above the shop, I found myself thinking about the journey that had led me here. 6 months ago, I had sold my family home in an act of defiance against my daughter's plans to manage my decline. Now I was on the verge of a new beginning that not even I could have imagined then. There was something profoundly liberating in the realization that at 70, my story wasn't winding down but opening into new and unexpected chapters. The house Becky had assumed would be her inheritance had instead become the seed money for a journey of self-discovery and reinvention. As I drifted off to sleep, I wondered what other surprises might lie ahead. What other capabilities might be waiting to be discovered? What other contributions I might yet make to this community that had been my home for so many decades? One thing was certain. I was no longer anyone's burden. I was becoming, perhaps for the first time, fully myself. The day after the closing, I stood in the lobby of the Blackwood building, my building now, gazing up at the soaring Art Deco ceiling, with its intricate moldings and vintage chandelier. Early morning light streamed through the stained glass inserts above the brass-framed entrance doors, casting jewel-toned patterns across the marble floor. Gerald Peterson, the building manager Eleanor had praised so highly, stood beside me with a ring of keys and a thick binder labeled Property Management. "So, Ms. Wilson," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the grand space, "shall we begin the official tour?" "Please," I replied, still struggling to absorb the reality of what I'd done. The paperwork had been signed yesterday afternoon in Eleanor's attorney's office, a surprisingly brief process for such a momentous transaction. Eleanor herself had handed me the master keys afterward with a simple, "Steward it well, Margaret," before departing for her winter home in Arizona. Gerald, a trim man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and the practical demeanor of someone who'd spent decades solving other people's problems, led me through the building with methodical thoroughness. We inspected the recently updated HVAC system, the electrical room with its complex panel, the service elevator that connected all 6 floors, and the basement storage areas. "The tenants are generally quite stable," he explained as we rode the main elevator to the top floor. "Most have been here for years. They're accustomed to responsive management and well-maintained premises, which is why they're willing to pay premium rates. And they don't yet know about the change in ownership," I confirmed. "Not officially. They received notice that Blackwood Properties was transferring management to Horizon Properties, but no specific mention of you as the new owner. That announcement would typically come from you directly whenever you're ready. The thought made my stomach tighten. Most of these tenants were established professionals, attorneys, financial advisors, the owners of upscale businesses. How would they react to learning that their landlord was now a 70-year-old former English teacher who'd been in business less than a year? Would they question my competence, my financial stability, my ability to maintain the building's prestigious status? "I'd like to meet them individually over the next few weeks," I said, deciding that a personal approach would be best. "Once I've had time to review all the leases and familiarize myself with any outstanding issues." Gerald nodded approvingly. "A wise approach. I can arrange those meetings at your convenience." As we continued the tour, Gerald pointed out small issues that needed attention. A persistent leak in a second-floor restroom, worn carpeting in one of the hallways, a minor crack in the lobby's marble that should be monitored. None were urgent, but each represented the kind of ongoing maintenance that Eleanor had mentioned. I made notes, already mentally calculating costs and priorities. By the time we finished the tour midday, my head was swimming with information. Gerald had been thorough and patient, explaining everything from the building's security systems to the schedule for window washing. He'd introduced me to the maintenance staff, 2 full-time employees who handled everything from changing light bulbs to minor plumbing repairs, and walked me through the janitorial service contract. "You seem a bit overwhelmed," Gerald observed as we returned to his small but efficient office off the main lobby. "Is it that obvious?" I admitted with a small laugh. "It's a lot to take in." "It is," he agreed. "But Mrs. Blackwood wouldn't have selected you if she didn't believe you were capable. And I'm here to handle the day-to-day operations. That's my job." "Thank you, Gerald. I appreciate your confidence." He handed me the management binder. "Review this when you have time. It contains all the essential information: tenant contact details, vendor contracts, maintenance schedules, emergency procedures. And my cell phone number is on the first page. I'm available anytime." As I prepared to leave, Gerald cleared his throat slightly. "Ms. Wilson, if I may, some of the tenants might be curious about the transition. If they ask me directly, what would you prefer I tell them about you?" I considered the question carefully. "The truth is fine, Gerald. I've nothing to hide. I'm a retired English teacher who started a new chapter as a business owner. I own Maggie's Corner Bookshop and now this building. I'm still learning, but I'm committed to maintaining the Blackwood Building's excellent reputation and service." He nodded, seeming satisfied with my response. "Very good. Authenticity tends to work best in these situations." I left the Blackwood building with the heavy binder tucked under my arm, my mind already organizing tasks into immediate, short-term, and longer-term categories. The walk back to Maggie's Corner took me through Oak Ridge's downtown, past the courthouse with its classical columns, the row of shops that had been there since my childhood, and the small park where the farmers' market was held each Saturday. I'd lived in this town my entire adult life, but today it felt different somehow. I wasn't just passing through these streets as a resident or a consumer. I was now a stakeholder in its economic fabric, responsible for a significant piece of its commercial infrastructure. The realization was both empowering and humbling. At the bookshop, Olivia looked up from helping a customer when I entered, her eyes immediately noticing the binder I carried. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked when the customer had left, her voice hushed with excitement. I nodded, still a bit dazed by the morning's tour. "It's official. The Blackwood Building is now part of Horizon Properties. Maggie, that's incredible." She hugged me impulsively, then stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. "Sorry, that wasn't very professional, but I'm just so... Wow, you actually did it." "I did," I agreed, allowing myself to feel a moment of genuine pride. Though I'm still not entirely sure what possessed me. "Vision," Olivia said firmly. The same vision that made you open this place when everyone thought it was crazy. You see possibilities that others miss. Her confidence in me was touching. Well, this possibility comes with 6 floors of responsibilities and 24 tenants, who don't yet know that their building is now owned by the local bookshop lady. They'll know soon enough, she replied pragmatically. Oak Ridge isn't exactly a metropolis. News travels. She was right, of course. Despite Gerald's discretion and Eleanor's carefully structured transaction, it was only a matter of time before my ownership became common knowledge. I just hoped to be properly prepared before that happened, to have mastered enough of the details to present myself as a competent property owner, rather than a novice overwhelmed by my new responsibilities. That evening, I spread the contents of Gerald's binder across my kitchen table, organizing the materials into categories: tenant information, financial data, maintenance records, operational procedures. I created a spreadsheet to track lease, renewal dates, another for scheduled maintenance tasks, and a third for building expenses. By midnight, I had a reasonably comprehensive understanding of the property's current status and immediate needs. The Blackwood building was even more profitable than Eleanor's initial overview had suggested. With full occupancy and premium rental rates, it generated substantial monthly income, more than enough to cover the financing payments, operating expenses, and still provide a healthy profit margin. The building had been impeccably maintained, with all major systems updated within the past decade and a significant reserve fund for future improvements. As a pure investment, it was remarkably sound, far more stable than most new businesses. With Gerald's continued management and the systems already in place, the day-to-day operations required minimal direct involvement from me. I could focus on strategic decisions and tenant relationships while maintaining my primary role at Maggie's Corner. Why then did I still feel that flutter of anxiety when I thought about announcing my ownership? The answer, I realized as I prepared for bed, had less to do with the building itself and more to do with how others perceived me, particularly my family. For nearly a year now, I'd been defying expectations, selling the family home, opening a business, establishing myself as an independent entity, separate from my role as Becky's mother or Frank's widow. Each step had been met with initial resistance, followed by grudging acceptance as I proved more capable than anticipated. But the Blackwood building represented a quantum leap in scale and complexity. It was one thing to run a modest bookshop in a small town. It was quite another to own a multi-million-dollar commercial property housing prestigious businesses. Even I occasionally questioned whether I'd overreached. The next morning brought a test of my newfound confidence sooner than I'd expected. I'd just opened the shop and was preparing the day's first batch of coffee when Tom Carter walked in, dressed in his usual impeccable business attire. "Morning, Maggie," he greeted me with an awkward formality that immediately put me on alert. Tom rarely visited the shop except when accompanying Becky or picking up Ethan after a shift. "Tom," I responded, keeping my tone light. "What brings you in so early? Coffee to go?" "Actually, I was hoping we could talk." He glanced around the empty shop. "Is there somewhere private?" I led him to the small table in the corner that I used for business meetings, my mind racing through possibilities. Had something happened to Becky or Ethan? Was there some family emergency? "Is everything all right?" I asked as we sat down. "That depends," he replied cryptically. "Maggie, I had a rather interesting conversation with Richard Morgan at the gym this morning." Richard Morgan. The name took a moment to register, a partner at one of the law firms that occupied the 4th floor of the Blackwood building. "Oh?" I said, working to keep my expression neutral. He mentioned that Blackwood Properties has transferred management of their building to a new company. Horizon Properties. Tom watched my face carefully. A company that, according to county records filed yesterday, lists Margaret Wilson as its principal owner. So it had begun, even sooner than I'd anticipated. I took a deep breath. "That's correct." Tom leaned forward, his expression a mix of disbelief and concern. "Maggie, please tell me you haven't purchased the Blackwood building." "I have," I confirmed, straightening slightly in my chair. "The transaction closed yesterday." He stared at me as if I'd announced I was planning to fly to the moon. That's not possible. That building is worth—" "I'm aware of its value," I interrupted. "Eleanor Blackwood offered it to me with favorable owner financing terms. The rental income more than covers the payments and operating expenses." "Eleanor Blackwood offered it to you?" His voice rose in astonishment. "Why would she do that?" The question irked me slightly. "Because she believes I'm capable of being a good steward for the property. She's been watching how I've managed this business and was impressed with what she saw." Tom ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of agitation I recognized from family disagreements. "Maggie, this is reckless. Commercial real estate at that scale involves enormous risk. The potential liability alone is covered by comprehensive insurance policies that Eleanor has had in place for years and that I've maintained," I finished for him. "Tom, I appreciate your concern, but this wasn't an impulsive decision. I've spent weeks reviewing the financials, consulting with advisors, and considering the implications." "Advisors? Who? Helen from your book club?" The dismissive tone was familiar, the same one he'd used when I'd first mentioned opening Maggie's Corner. "Helen, yes, whose 30 years as a CPA gives her considerable financial expertise. Also, Jim Peterson from First Heritage Bank, and Martin Walsh, a commercial real estate attorney who's handled transactions like this for decades." I met his gaze steadily. "I didn't undertake this lightly, Tom." He sat back, momentarily silenced by the evidence that I'd done more due diligence than he'd assumed. After a moment, he tried a different approach. "Have you told Becky about this?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I was planning to once everything was finalized and I'd had time to fully understand all aspects of the property. She's going to be concerned." "I imagine she will be," I agreed. "Just as she was concerned about the bookshop, which is now turning a profit right on schedule with my business plan." Tom sighed heavily. "This is different, Maggie. The bookshop was a significant investment of your savings, yes, but this is an entirely different magnitude of risk. If anything goes wrong, if tenants leave, if the building needs major repairs, then I'll handle those challenges as they arise," I said firmly. "Just as any business owner would. The building has a substantial reserve fund for unexpected expenses, and the tenant list includes some of Oak Ridge's most stable businesses. Most have years remaining on their leases." I could see him struggling to reconcile the practical, conservative mother-in-law he thought he knew with the woman sitting before him, a woman who had just acquired one of the most significant commercial properties in town. "Why?" he finally asked, genuinely perplexed. "Why take this on at your stage of life? The bookshop I could understand. It was something you'd always wanted to do, a personal passion. But property management, commercial real estate?" The question was fair, and I took a moment to consider my answer. "When Becky suggested I was becoming a burden," I began carefully, "it forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths. For most of my adult life, I defined myself primarily through my relationships to others, Frank's wife, Becky's mother, my student's teacher. Those were meaningful roles, but they also involved a certain containment, certain expectations about who I was and what I was capable of." Tom shifted uncomfortably at the mention of the burden conversation, but I continued. Opening. Maggie's Corner was my first step toward defining myself on my own terms. It's been successful beyond what even I imagined, both financially and as a community resource. When Eleanor approached me about the Blackwood building, my first reaction was exactly what yours is now, that it was too much, too big, too risky for someone like me. I gestured to the bookshop around us, the space I'd created from nothing but determination and a lifetime of deferred dreams. But then I realized, who decides what's too much for me? Who determines the limits of what I can accomplish? For too long, I accepted other people's definitions of my capabilities. I'm not doing that anymore. Tom was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed again, but this time it sounded less like exasperation and more like resignation. Becky is still going to have a fit, he predicted. I smiled slightly. Probably, but she'll adjust, just as she did to this place. Just as she's learning to see me as a person with my own goals and ambitions, not just as her mother who needs to be managed. Tom stood, checking his watch. I should get to the office. Richard has a meeting with me at 9. He doesn't know we're related, so he'll probably mention the building. Should I pretend I don't know? No need, I replied. You can tell him I'm your mother-in-law if it comes up naturally. I'm not hiding my ownership, just introducing it thoughtfully. As he prepared to leave, Tom paused by the door. For what? It's worth, Maggie. I hope this works out for you. It's impressive. Unexpected, but impressive. Coming from my financially conservative son-in-law, this qualified approval felt like high praise indeed. Thank you, Tom. And when you speak with Becky, I'll let you tell her yourself, he interjected quickly. Some conversations I know better than to get in the middle of. After he left, I called Gerald at the Blackwood building to warn him that word was beginning to spread. He took the news calmly, as he seemed to take everything. I'll prepare a formal announcement for the tenants, he suggested. Perhaps a letter from you introducing yourself, followed by individual meetings as you mentioned yesterday. Perfect, I agreed. And Gerald, if any of them express concerns about the new ownership, please assure them that there are no planned changes to building operations or management. You'll continue in your role exactly as before. Of course, Ms. Wilson, change makes people nervous, but continuity in day-to-day management should help ease the transition. I spent the morning at the shop serving customers and helping Olivia prepare for an author event scheduled for that evening. But my mind kept returning to the conversation with Tom, anticipating a similar but likely more intense discussion with Becky. Would she be angry that I hadn't consulted her? Worried about the financial implications? Or perhaps just possibly impressed that her aging mother had undertaken something so ambitious? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Just after the lunch rush, as I was restocking the new releases display, the shop door opened with more force than necessary. Becky strode in, still in her work clothes but with a flush to her cheeks that suggested she might have left an important meeting to come here. Mom, she said without preamble, we need to talk. I nodded to Olivia, who immediately understood and moved to take over the front counter, giving us privacy. Let's sit in the back office, I suggested, leading Becky through the beaded curtain that separated the shop floor from my small administrative space. As soon as the curtain fell behind us, she rounded on me. The Blackwood building, Mom? The Blackwood building? What were you thinking? I was thinking it was an excellent investment opportunity, I replied calmly. Which it is based on thorough financial analysis. You should have talked to me first, she insisted, pacing the small space. Something this significant. Why? I interrupted, my voice still level but firm. Why should I have consulted you before making a business decision about my own assets? The blunt question seemed to catch her off guard. Because it affects the whole family. Because it's an enormous financial commitment that could impact your security, and by extension, our future plans. Ah, I said, understanding perfectly what she meant by future plans. You mean it affects Ethan's inheritance, the assets you and Tom have been counting on. Becky had the grace to look slightly abashed, but she pressed on. That's part of it, yes. We've always understood that your estate would eventually help provide for Ethan's education. just as you helped with mine. That's the normal flow of family resources between generations. And you're concerned that I'm now investing those resources rather than preserving them for your son. I'm concerned that you're taking unnecessary risks with your financial security, she countered. Mom, commercial real estate at that scale, it's complex, it's volatile, it's lucrative, I finished for her. The Blackwood building generates substantial annual income, significantly more than the interest on conservative investments would provide. If my goal were simply to maximize what I leave to Ethan, this would actually be a more effective approach. Becky stared at me, clearly not having considered this angle. But the risk is manageable and calculated, I assured her. Eleanor structured the sale with terms that protect me financially. The building is fully occupied with stable, long-term tenants. Gerald Peterson, who's managed the property for 20 years, is continuing in his role. I've maintained all the insurance policies and reserve funds that Eleanor established. I moved to my desk and retrieved a folder containing the simplified financial projections Helen had helped me prepare, showing the purchase terms, income projections, expense allocations, and contingency planning. Here, I said, handing it to Becky. Review these if you'd like. They show clearly that this investment strengthens my financial position rather than weakening it. She took the folder automatically, but didn't open it immediately. Instead, she sank into the office's guest chair, her expression shifting from anger to something more complex. Confusion, perhaps, or the dawning realization that she might have misjudged the situation. You've really thought this through, she said. Not quite a question, but not quite a statement either. Of course I have, I replied, sitting across from her. Becky, when did you start assuming that I was incapable of making sound decisions? That I needed your protection or guidance to manage my affairs? The directness of the question made her flinch slightly. I don't think you're incapable. Don't you? I challenged gently. When I wanted to open this shop, your immediate reaction was dismissal, that it was financially reckless, that I couldn't possibly understand what was involved. When I sold the house, you were furious, certain I was making a terrible mistake. Each time I've made a decision that didn't align with your expectations, you've responded as if I were a child acting impulsively, rather than an adult exercising my judgment. Becky looked down at the folder in her hands, not meeting my eyes. I was worried about you, she said quietly. After Dad died, you seemed adrift. I just wanted to make sure you were taken care of. I know, I acknowledged, softening my tone. Your intentions were good. But Becky, I'm not helpless or incompetent. I managed a classroom of 30 teenagers for decades. I ran our household finances while your father built his career. I've been making responsible decisions my entire adult life. This is different, she insisted. You've never been in business before, never managed commercial property. And so I couldn't. Possibly learn? I asked. Couldn't possibly develop new skills at my age? Is that really what you believe? The question hung between us, challenging the assumptions that had guided our relationship for years. Finally, Becky opened the folder and began reviewing the documents, her trained eye quickly assessing the figures. These projections are actually quite conservative, she admitted after several minutes of silence. You've accounted for potential vacancies, maintenance reserves, even property tax increases. Helen helped me prepare them, I explained. She's been invaluable throughout this process. Becky looked up from the papers, a hint of surprise in her expression. Mom, this is genuinely impressive. I had no idea you were capable of. I mean, that you were interested in this kind of complex financial planning. Neither did I until recently, I said honestly. I'm discovering aspects of myself that never had the opportunity to develop before. It's been though enlightening. She closed the folder, her initial anger now visibly replaced by a reluctant respect. "So you own the Blackwood building, one of the most prestigious properties in town." "I do. And you're managing it while also running the bookshop." "Gerald handles the day-to-day operations at the building," I clarified. "I make the strategic decisions and maintain tenant relationships. It's a model that worked well for Eleanor for decades." Becky shook her head slightly, as if still struggling to reconcile this new reality. "When you sold the house, I thought you were having some kind of crisis, rebelling against getting older maybe. But this is different. This is systematic, planned." "It's a new chapter," I said simply. "One I'm writing for myself rather than having it written for me." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a short, surprised sound. "You know, when I was 16 and wanted to stay out past curfew, you told me that your house, your rules. I never imagined you'd apply that same principle to defying my expectations at 70. It was such a perfect summation of our role reversal that I couldn't help smiling. "Well, my business, my decisions." "Apparently." She handed back the folder. "I still think you should have told me sooner." Finding out from Tom, who heard it from Richard Morgan's assistant's cousin or whatever the Oak Ridge gossip chain is, these days, it was jarring. "I was planning to tell you properly once everything was settled," I assured her. "The timing got away from me. The Oak Ridge grapevine moves faster than I anticipated." Becky stood, smoothing her skirt with a gesture I recognized as one of my own, a habit she'd unconsciously adopted. "I should get back to work. But Mom, I'd like to hear more about this. Maybe dinner this weekend? Just the two of us?" The olive branch was unexpected, but welcome. "I'd like that." At the door to the shop floor, she paused. "I'm still processing all this, but I want you to know. Dad would be amazed, impressed, but amazed." After she left, I sat quietly in my office, absorbing the encounter. It had gone better than I'd feared, but differently than I'd expected. The anger had dissipated more quickly, replaced not by the grudging acceptance I'd anticipated, but by something that looked almost like admiration. For so long, our relationship had been defined by clearly understood roles. I was the mother, who supported; she was the daughter who achieved. I had been steady, reliable, predictable, while she had been dynamic, ambitious, forward-moving. My decision to sell the house and open the shop had disrupted that pattern, but the Blackwood building acquisition had shattered it completely. Now we were both achievers in our own spheres, both taking calculated risks to build something meaningful. The playing field between us had leveled in ways neither of us had foreseen. Over the next 2 weeks, word of my new acquisition spread through Oak Ridge with the efficiency of a small-town information network. Gerald reported that the tenants had received the formal announcement with reactions ranging from mild surprise to genuine curiosity. Most seemed reassured by his continued management and my commitment to maintaining the building's standards. One by one, I met with each tenant, introducing myself, listening to their concerns or requests, and establishing the personal connection that had been Eleanor's hallmark as an owner. Many were initially surprised to discover that the former English teacher they remembered from Oak Ridge High was now their landlord, but those who had visited Maggie's Corner quickly made the connection between the well-run bookshop and my new role. "You've created quite a stir in the business community," Jim told me when I stopped by the bank to sign some final paperwork. "The old guard doesn't quite know what to make of you." The old guard meaning the men who've traditionally controlled Oak Ridge's commercial interests? I asked, having noticed that most property owners in town were indeed male and considerably younger than myself. Jim nodded, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Exactly. Eleanor was always seen as something of an anomaly," the widow continuing. "Her husband's business. But you're different. You're building something new on your own terms. It's refreshing, disruptive in the best sense." The observation gave me pause. I hadn't set out to challenge any established order or make a statement about women in business. I'd simply been pursuing opportunities that resonated with my evolving sense of self. But perhaps that was precisely the point. I was acting from internal motivation rather than external expectations, and that in itself represented a kind of quiet revolution. The Saturday evening dinner with Becky proved surprisingly pleasant. We met at Rossini's, a small Italian restaurant that had been a family favorite for special occasions throughout her childhood. Away from Tom's financial concerns and my defensive positioning, we found our way to a more genuine conversation than we'd had in months. "The thing is," Becky said as we shared a tiramisu for dessert, "I've always seen you primarily as my mother. Capable in that role, certainly, but defined by it. I never really considered that you might have ambitions or capacities beyond that identity." "I didn't either, for a long time," I admitted. "Your father and I were partners in building our life together, but his career was always center stage. My teaching was important to me, but it was steady, predictable, not the kind of work that involved risk or bold moves." "But you always encouraged me to aim high," Becky pointed out. "To never let being a woman limit my goals. You pushed me to apply to competitive colleges, to negotiate hard for salaries, to speak up in meetings dominated by men." I'd never considered that contradiction before, how I'd encouraged ambition in my daughter that I hadn't permitted myself. "I wanted you to have more options than my generation did, to not feel confined by the expectations that shaped my choices. And now you're making those bold moves yourself," she observed, at 70. "Better late than never?" I suggested, with a small smile. Becky twirled her spoon thoughtfully. "You know, when I suggested that assisted living conversation on your birthday, I genuinely thought I was being practical, looking out for your best interests." "I know you did," I acknowledged. "Just as I always thought I was looking out for yours by encouraging independence while providing a stable foundation." "But you weren't becoming a burden," she continued, meeting my eyes directly. "You were becoming more fully yourself, and I almost missed seeing that because I was so focused on managing what I saw as your decline rather than recognizing your continued growth." The insight surprised me with its clarity and self-awareness. "That's remarkably perceptive, Becky." She shrugged slightly. "I've had some time to reflect, and seeing you handle the Blackwood acquisition with such competence, it forced me to reconsider some assumptions. About me specifically, or about aging generally?" "Both," she admitted. "I've been so focused on youth and potential in my own career that I developed a kind of blind spot about the possibilities that remain in later life. Even though you were right there, showing me every day with your students that learning and growth continue well beyond what society often considers the productive years." We shared a moment of understanding that felt new between us, not the comfortable familiarity of mother and daughter, but the mutual recognition of two women at different life stages, each with her own challenges and achievements. "So," Becky said, signaling for the check, "what's next for Oak Ridge's newest commercial property mogul? Any more buildings in your sights?" I laughed. "Let me master this one first. Though there is a vacant storefront across from the Blackwood, building that might make an interesting satellite location for the bookshop someday." Becky's eyes widened slightly. "You're joking." "Mostly," I assured her. "For now, I'm focused on integrating these two ventures, finding the synergies between them, building on what I've learned from each." As we walked to our cars afterward, Becky surprised me with a genuine hug. Not the perfunctory greeting or farewell we'd fallen into over recent years, but a real embrace. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said quietly. "What you've accomplished this year, it's extraordinary. And I'm sorry I didn't see your potential sooner." "I didn't see it either," I reminded her. "Sometimes we need circumstances to reveal parts of ourselves we've kept hidden, even from our own awareness." Driving home to my apartment above the bookshop, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey of the past year. From the moment Becky had suggested I was becoming a burden, a painful catalyst that had ultimately propelled me toward growth rather than decline, to this evening's dinner where she had acknowledged my capabilities with genuine admiration. The house she had expected to inherit had instead become the foundation for a new identity I was still discovering. The mother she had expected to manage through a quiet, predictable old age had instead emerged as a businesswoman with ambitions and capacities neither of us had fully recognized. As I parked behind Maggie's corner and climbed the stairs to my apartment, I noticed lights still on in several windows of the Blackwood building visible at the end of the street. Professionals working late, perhaps, or the cleaning crew preparing the offices for Monday morning. My building, a concrete manifestation of the transformation I'd undergone. Not bad, I thought with quiet satisfaction, for a woman who was supposed to be becoming a burden. 3 years passed quickly. On a crisp autumn morning, I sat at a corner table in Maggie's corner, now expanded into the adjacent storefront, watching Olivia train our newest employee. The shop had flourished beyond my wildest expectations, becoming a hub of community activity with a robust calendar of events and a loyal customer base that spanned generations. The Blackwood building, now officially known by its original historical name, the Wilson Building, had maintained full occupancy throughout my ownership, with a waiting list of businesses eager for space. Gerald continued to manage the day-to-day operations with his characteristic efficiency, while I focused on long-term planning and tenant relationships. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review," Olivia said, sliding into the chair opposite mine. At 25, she had evolved from assistant manager to full partner in the business, bringing fresh ideas and technological savvy that complemented my more traditional approach. "Thank you," I replied, accepting the folder she offered. "And how are the plans for the Literacy Foundation coming along?" The Oak Ridge Literacy Foundation had been my latest project, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting reading and writing skills throughout the community, funded largely by profits from the Blackwood building. What had begun as a small initiative to provide books to underserved children had grown into a comprehensive program with dedicated staff and ambitious goals. "We've secured the space for the Learning Center," Olivia confirmed. "Renovations begin next month." The Learning Center would occupy the ground floor of my newest acquisition, a former warehouse on the edge of downtown that we were converting into mixed-use space, with affordable apartments above and community resources below. My phone buzzed, with a text from Becky. "Meeting ran long. On our way now. Ethan has big news." I smiled, anticipating the family lunch we had planned. At 15, Ethan had blossomed into a thoughtful young man with his mother's drive and, somewhat to everyone's surprise, my entrepreneurial spirit. He had graduated from Saturday shifts at the bookshop to developing a small business creating websites for local merchants. The bell above the door chimed, and Becky entered with Ethan and Tom in tow. My relationship with my daughter had evolved dramatically over the years, moving from the tense standoff after I sold the house to a partnership of equals, each respecting the other's strengths and decisions. "Sorry we're late," Becky said, kissing my cheek. The board meeting wouldn't end. Becky now served on the board of the community foundation I had established, bringing her corporate expertise to our philanthropic efforts. Tom, too, had found a role that suited him, providing pro bono financial consulting to small business owners through our mentorship program. "Grandma, guess what?" Ethan burst out, unable to contain his excitement. "My app won the state competition. I'm going to the national finals in Chicago." "That's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely proud. Ethan had developed a mobile application that connected elderly residents with young people offering help with technology, errands, and companionship. Inspired, he had told me, by watching my journey into business. Over lunch, we discussed Ethan's project, Becky's recent promotion, and the upcoming expansion of our community initiatives. The conversation flowed easily, unmarked by the tension and judgment that had once characterized our family interactions. "You know," Tom said thoughtfully as we finished our meal, "when you sold the house and started all this, I thought you were making the biggest mistake of your life." "I remember," I said dryly. "You weren't exactly subtle about it." He laughed, acknowledging the truth. "I couldn't have been more wrong. What you've built here, not just the businesses, but the community impact, it's remarkable. You've created a legacy far more valuable than any inheritance could have been." "A living legacy," Becky added, her expression softening. "One that benefits Oak Ridge now, not just after you're gone." I was touched by their understanding. "That was never my conscious intention," I admitted. "I just wanted to prove I wasn't a burden, that I still had value and contributions to make." "Well, mission thoroughly accomplished," Becky said, reaching for my hand. Though I still feel terrible that it took my thoughtless comment to set all this in motion. "Don't," I reassured her. "Sometimes we need a catalyst, even a painful one, to push us out of comfortable patterns. Your comment forced me to confront how I wanted to spend my remaining years. I'm grateful for that wake-up call, however it came." After they left, I walked through my expanded bookshop, greeting customers and straightening displays. At 73, I had more energy and purpose than I'd had at 60. The calendar on my desk was filled with meetings, planning sessions, and community events. My apartment above the shop remained my sanctuary, but my world had expanded far, beyond those walls. That evening, I sat on my small balcony overlooking Elm Street, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. From this vantage point, I could see the Wilson Building's distinctive silhouette at the end of the street, its windows glowing as workers finished their day. Further along, the warehouse renovation was visible, scaffolding outlining what would soon become affordable homes and a learning center. What had begun as an act of defiance, selling the house my daughter expected to inherit, had evolved into something far more meaningful. A renaissance, a reinvention, a reclaiming of possibilities I had never allowed myself to imagine. I thought of Eleanor Blackwood, now in her mid-80s and still sending me the occasional note of approval as she watched my ventures from afar. "Creating wealth is good," she had written in her last letter, "but creating value is better. You've learned the difference." The house on Maple Avenue had contained a lifetime of memories, but it had also become a symbol of limitation, a holding place where I was expected to quietly await the end. In selling it, I hadn't just disposed of real estate. I had rejected the narrative that aging meant diminishment. Instead, I had embraced the radical notion that my seventh decade could be a time of expansion, contribution, and discovery. The burden my daughter had feared I was becoming had transformed into a cornerstone of community growth, proof that vision and determination recognize no age limits. As the last light faded from the sky, I smiled at the irony. By selling what she thought she would inherit, I had given Becky something far more valuable, an example of courage, reinvention, and the unlimited possibilities that come from writing your own story, no matter the chapter. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.